Hey everybody, how you doing? Alexx Calise here. Thank you so much for tuning into the pod. Today we have a really special guest. She's a fantastic photographer. She's photographed everybody from the Black Veil Brides to 69 Eyes and my band. Awesome. And she's also photographed exotic animals, dogs. She's done dog photo shoots, and she's an educator as well. So everyone, please welcome Miss Anabel DFlux.
Hello.
Go. Well, we'll insert the clap later.
Yeah. I was like, oh.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am so good because I haven't seen you in such a long time, and I'm so glad that we're here together.
Likewise. I was like, you know what the fastest way to let time get away from you when you travel all the time?
Yes.
And you're like, it's fine. I saw you like a year, 4 years ago, 5 years ago.
Probably. And then, the pandemic happened, so we're not counting that. That doesn't count. No. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me. I wanted to talk a little bit about your photography and firstly, how you got into it, because you got into it at like a stupid young age.
I did. So my kind of little artsy backstory is that I've always been very artistically inclined since I was a little kid. And my mom really fostered that in me. I mean, she put me into classes for drawing, painting, dancing. I even tried piano for like 2 days and then realized I'm not very musically inclined. So we tried that for a couple days. But I've always been so into the visual arts. And kind of the last art form I never really tried was photography. And it was kind of an ongoing thing with my family that for my birthday, instead of toys and stuff, I would get arts and crafts. That was like a huge thing for me. And we came around my 8th birthday and they kind of ran out of arts and crafts to get me. So my grandfather bought me a little point and shoot digital camera. It was one of those like little red ones, Target brand.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask what brand.
It had one button.
Okay.
Click and you take a picture.
Okay.
So it didn't have anything in it, but something about it just enthralled me completely. But a couple of years later, what really kind of solidified that I was like, I need to put everything into photography was my parents took me to the zoo and I brought that little point and shoot camera and I would just for hours just run around and capture photos of these animals just doing really interesting things. And I was just so enthralled. And then I got in and spent hours looking through the photos and I'm like, this is amazing. And unfortunately, I dropped literally every other artistic endeavor I had and just put everything into photography. Well, I guess unfortunately, fortunately.
I was going to say fortunately.
I was like, buy paintings. I still probably have paint somewhere. Just, I don't know where it is.
But it's still, I can tell actually that you were an artist or a painter or something like that based on your composition in your photos.
I love that you say that because when I went to college and I had a professor in visual communications, which is, in my opinion, just a fancy term for graphic design. He asked me because I came in and I was considered a little bit of a teacher's pet because I am so passionate about learning that I've always been the one who's like, I'm going to sit in the front of the room. I want to sit next to the teacher so I can learn more and ask questions and be kind of that inquisitive mind. And of course, the professor kind of noticed that and he came over and he's like, so what are you passionate about? What do you do? And I'm like, I do photography. I showed him some of my photos. And the first thing he asked me was, do you have a background in drawing? And I go, what made you ask that? And he goes, your compositions look like paintings. So I'm like, I love that you brought that up because you honestly have to be the second person who ever said that to me.
Really?
Yeah, it took me back to that. I was like, my professor pointed that out one day. And I was like, interesting.
Yeah, because they have that quality about them, especially, when you walked in today, we started talking about your style, because I know that you do a lot of different types of photography. Obviously, you're doing musicians, you're doing pets, you're doing exotic animals, but the constant with all of your work is your style, and it's that composition. Like I was telling you, I could spot your work from a mile away. I'm like, that's definitely Anabel, which is it's great because, just like a vocalist, they have their signature, or a writer, they have their signature, and you have yours.
And I really, really love that you point that out again, because with my education and kind of in modern times, I have a lot of students asking me, how do you develop your style? Because honestly, I think in any art form, that is kind of the number one question. Like, I'm sure the
Hmm.
vocalists have that a lot too. Like, how do you develop your singing style, your vocal style? And I think that can be a little hard to answer because you can't just sit somebody down and be like, here's the formula for
Hmm.
creating a style. But what I tend to say is as long as you kind of stay true to photographing what you like and kind of the way that your eye sees things and the way that your eye, it's not just seeing your subject, but seeing the colors and seeing everything in the frame and how you put everything together, you'll find that if you continue to be kind of honest to what you like, you can put all of your work down on a sheet and just look at it and be like, I can see the like joining force and everything.
Right.
And for me, when I looked at it, I go, I think it's a lot of my color grading is
Hmm.
also kind of a joining first because believe it or not, even though a lot of my interests are in like the darker music and all that, I love.
Right.
I am here to admit it. I finally turned 30 and said that I love color.
Well, and I could tell. I mean, like the hair was an indicator, but no, I actually, even in your dark portraiture, there is a lot of warmth in those photos. There is a lot of color, even though they're darker colors. It's still vibrant and colorful.
Yeah, and it's kind of I love the way that color makes people feel.
Hmm.
Like probably the subject that I studied the most, because another preface, I went to school for visual communications for only about 2 years. I got an associate's in that, and then I switched course and went to university for business. So I never actually formally studied photography or really truly dove into studying any sort of art form in that way. You know, most people go, they take classes in this or, you know, theory classes and all that. But what I did spend the most amount of time learning was color theory because that was something that I found incredibly fascinating. How colors have so much power over the human mind and the human emotion. I mean, look at even the way that you do color in your own home and what
Right.
kind of emotion that evokes. Why do you use certain colors in your bedroom that you won't use in your living room? Why do you use colors in your kitchen that you might not use in another room? It's because of the feeling that it gives you when you walk into that space.
Right.
So I find that photography has as much of a psychological element to it as it does just, that's a cute puppy in a picture. Like my pet photography has a lot of vibrancy to it because the feeling when you see your puppy or your kitten or something usually tends to be very kind of either excited or very loving or something that's incredibly kind of optimistic, which is vibrancy in color versus shooting a metal band that is trying to evoke a completely different emotion. You can have really bright colors or interesting colors, but they still have a combination that gives you a different emotion.
Right. Well, let me ask you about color theory. Are you applying that color theory more to the post process or even in camera?
So my color theory application tends to be more of a post-processing in the sense that when I apply the color theory knowledge, it's in the tones. So I'm using the actual colors that are in that photo, but I tend to adjust each color individually so that the combination of them is what produces the result.
Okay.
So, for example, when I do a consultation, say with a commercial client or something, I will ask them what their brand colors are, what they're trying to evoke, and we'll put those colors in that shot. But maybe the orange that they picked out for the dress isn't exactly the orange that we need for that emotion in the shot.
Hmm.
So then I'll go into post and I will do adjustments on that individual color. So, like, the colors exist in reality. It's just, I'll go in there and be like, maybe this blue needs to be pushed a little bit more towards a teal.
Okay.
Maybe this orange needs to be pushed a little bit more towards a red or like an ochre color.
Okay. So let me ask you, like when you're seeing just anything that you want to take a picture of, are you visualizing everything like in terms of the post process? Are you looking at
Absolutely.
that and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to, crush the blacks on that and like bring up the magenta or something?
Absolutely. And it's so funny that some of my clients who have known me for a long time, they'll see my brain work that way and they go, we have no idea what you're seeing, but we'll trust that this looks good. But I think it's the same concept as you take a client to like a dingy alleyway and they're looking around and they're seeing all the cobwebs and they're seeing all the grossness of that alley and they go, here? Really? When you know how you shoot or how you want to shoot, you look at a space so differently. I don't notice the cobwebs on it. Or if I do, I go, that's a great texture. We can use
Right.
that as like a framing on my subject rather than look a dingy alleyway.
Right, right. So I guess when you were first starting out, did you focus more on getting the result right in camera, or was it more the post process that you focused on?
Definitely in camera, because when I started Photoshop, of course, existed, Lightroom existed, but they weren't as advanced as they are now. And frankly, I just didn't have the knowledge on post production
Right.
like I do now. So a lot of how I even chose to shoot was because I needed it to be right in camera, because I just didn't really know what to do with it outside of that. And of course, over time, you learn those programs, you dig around in them, and I can definitely tell you that Photoshop, Lightroom, all of that is like second nature to me now, but I like that I don't have that dependence on it,
Right.
because when you have that kind of dependence, I feel like you're not allowing yourself to look at a space and go, how can I make my subject look the best? You're looking at a space going, I guess I'll just correct that. It's fine. Oh, I guess I'll just correct that too. It's fine.
Right.
Rather than like, and also it saves you a lot of time.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Like, I don't know about you, but I can honestly admit that post production is not what I want to spend most of my time doing.
No.
I love being out there shooting.
You're also an educator. So you've done a ton of classes on your own, and then you're now teaching for Sigma and I believe Canon, right?
Canon was something I did before Sigma. So I
Okay.
did Canon for a short period of time when they had their like live learning set
Mhm.
up. And then I joined forces with Sigma Corporation of America, the lens company,
Okay.
who have given me this incredible platform to educate on. And outside of just the education that I do with that company, I also teach regularly for Samy's Camera. So if anyone who's local to Southern California probably knows Samy's Camera,
Oh yeah.
they're pretty much the only camera store here.
Right, right.
And they have a few different locations, and I teach at all of them. And I teach all the unique subjects like pet photography, flying action shots with dogs. I have a workshop coming up with them where we're doing equestrian jumping shots. So
Oh,
we're
I
going,
saw that. Yeah, on your social
yeah,
media you were doing some of that stuff. That's
yeah.
cool.
So some of the equestrian clients that I have that compete in show jumping are coming out to an arena. They're building up a show course, and we're having students come with me, stand in the middle of the arena, and photograph the horses going over obstacles and stuff like that. So I find that my classes are a little bit out of the ordinary.
Yeah, I was going
but
through your social media and I saw there was someone on a horse in a cap and gown. I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." Like she
yeah,
just graduated and
she just graduated, and we brought her horse to her campus because every day she would go to the barn and like take care of her horse, and that was her way of decompressing from very kind of stressful and arduous courses. So she goes, you know what, my horse graduated too, because my horse put up with
oh.
me too, and we had our dog there too.
Oh, that's
So it's like,
awesome.
and I'm like, that is the cutest thing, because my dog goes through all of life with me.
Right,
So
right.
every time I have an accomplishment, I like to say, we have an accomplishment. Because
Exactly.
my
They're
dog
family.
is there.
I mean, how do you meet these types of people? Because that's very unusual, especially out in Los Angeles. Like I would think you'd have to, hoof it to Calabasas or
I
something,
love what you do.
right?
I mean, to be fair, that shot was done in Orange County. So the horses turned out to be the funny thing. It's all the professional dog people I photograph
Yes.
are 50-50 shot in horses as well.
Okay.
So it just kind of pulled me in there. And then I ride horses as a hobby myself. So
That's right. Yes.
that was something that I also do because, and as a joke, it's kind of the running joke in my family that my very expensive hobby of photography turned into a career. So I had to one up it by finding a more expensive hobby. My expensive one turned into a career. So like, I gotta go up.
I didn't realize this, but I did a bit of a deep dive of your stuff. I
Oh
mean,
gosh.
no, it's a good thing. I mean, I know a lot about you because we're friends, but professionally, it's always interesting whenever I speak to anybody. Like I like to do a lot of research beforehand, and I didn't realize that you had started off doing animal photography. I thought that you had started off doing music photography.
Yeah, I actually started as a pet photographer, specifically photographing dogs in sporting competitions because my childhood best friend competed with her dogs. And she kind of like pulled me into the world of like agility and disc dogs and fast cat and all those kinds of American Kennel Club shows.
Hmm.
And I was just so fascinated with that. I loved it. So I got into photographing that. And to preface, I started professionally at the age of 15. And I don't know if anyone here remembers what they were like at 15, but stubborn is probably a great word to describe any teenager. So
Yes.
I was incredibly stubborn with the thought that I'm only ever going to photograph animals. I will never have a person in front of my camera. I don't want to photograph people. I want nothing to do with photographing people. I only want to photograph animals.
Mhm.
And I kept true with that for about a year. And within that time, I had a friend who was dating a musician. And probably know how that goes. Like they're dating a musician, the musician needs something. So their
Right.
teenage friend is like trying to figure out a way to help their partner get that. And she was bugging me to photograph him because he needed new promo images. And of our friend group, I was the only one who knew how to use a camera. And she hammered me consistently for months. And for months, you know, stubborn teenager, I was like, absolutely not. I don't photograph people. But eventually she broke me, as friends do. But and I'm so grateful that she did that because I tried it. And then he had a concert in that same month. And I tried that as well. And I go, this is kind of cool. So I changed my philosophy from I'm only doing this one niche. And to be fair, the idea of a niche came from the fact that most photographers have niches. So it was also kind of ingrained in my mind when I was reading up on other photographers and trying to kind of educate myself that you have to pick one thing that you're good at, especially back then. Everything was very compartmentalized.
And I think that was for a lot of industries, or
Yeah.
entertainment especially. They're like, stay in your lane. You cannot divert from this path. And it's like,
Yeah, it was kind
no.
of like if you were a newborn photographer, that's all you did. If you were a fashion photographer, that's all you did. And
Mhm.
nobody even looked into any other genres. And if they did, then they tried to constantly rebrand themselves for each different one. So
Mhm.
there might be one photographer that you know is a fashion photographer, and then he has an entirely separate company and brand for, say, wedding photography or something. Like nobody wanted to combine any of their niches from what I recall back then.
Right.
And of course, the world is different now, but I kind of had this idea that, well, I'm good at photographing pets and I love photographing pets. So I guess I'm just going to be a pet photographer. And then when I got broken out of that to try something different, my philosophy turned into, you know what? If I can figure out how to use my camera in like its maximum capabilities and see what all of these lenses are capable of doing, then why should I limit myself to one thing when I could go photograph everything? So I genuinely kind of sought out to try a lot of different things. And I can very honestly say that I have given nearly every photography genre a try.
Mhm.
But then with trying all of that, because my philosophy that I still kind of impart and teach today is you can say yes to everything because you can always say no the next time.
Exactly.
So through that, I found, you know, I appreciate photographers who do landscapes and real estate and nature and all that, but that's not really me.
Mhm.
I am very much into photographing living subjects. So all of a sudden, I changed my tune from I only want to photograph dogs to I love having people in front of my lens. And I
Right.
love having anything that's alive in front of my lens. That's kind of what I do. So I guess you could argue technically I have a niche.
Mhm.
I photograph living subjects,
Right.
but within that, I will photograph any like scope of things. I mean, there's clients that I have where I photographed everything from the pets that they've acquired to their weddings, to their birthdays, to their concerts and their children and all that because I just love photographing all of it. I feel like all of it is very storytelling.
Mhm.
And I feel like I relate so much to my subjects in so many different ways. Probably the same way that you do with anyone who listens to your music or watches your podcast or someone you photograph it or interview on your podcast. You're kind of like, I can see pieces of myself in everyone. You learn something new from everyone as well. And that's
Right.
kind of like, in my opinion, it's kind of the best kind of drug
Oh
where you get
yeah.
to meet people and learn
Mhm.
about them and open your mind to something different. I mean, I've done so many things in my life and had so many experiences that other people don't get to do. And that's exclusively because I didn't limit myself to, I'm only doing this one thing.
Yeah, I meet so many interesting people just having them come to my home and doing my podcast. I'm just so naturally curious, and I see that very much in you, which is why I think we both get along. But how does that affect your business? That curiosity, that natural curiosity that you have, and that natural way with people.
I would say the natural curiosity usually manifests in, wow, that's a crazy idea. Yeah, let's do it. And
Mhm.
everyone around is surprised. They're like, really? You're gonna try that? I'm
Yeah,
like, one life to live. Why not try that?
right.
So it's what got me on tour in Europe and stuff like that. Cause they're like, you're gonna go to a country where you don't speak the language and you're going to go out with a bunch of men on a bus. I'm like, what's the worst that
Yeah.
could happen?
Well, and that's, I mean, a lot of bad
Yeah.
things could happen, but
My
yeah.
brain doesn't go there.
Yeah,
But
let's
yes,
not go
yes.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, again, how I even started photographing exotic animals. It was another one of those things where everyone around is like, are you serious? You're going to go photograph a tiger? Like,
Right.
what? And I go, one life to live. Let's try it.
Right.
So I feel like that aspect, the curiosity aspect of it, is constantly striving me to try new things and to meet even more interesting people and new people. And in terms of a natural way with people, believe it or not, I was actually fairly shy for quite a big chunk of my life. Like, shy in the sense that I would completely open up with somebody that I know. But in terms of approaching somebody, I was scared to just approach somebody, which I think is, to be fair, intimidating for many people.
Yes.
Just cold approach somebody. You're like, what do I say? Nice shoes? I don't know.
Right.
And I remember my first ever photography mentor. And technically, I can say she's a photography mentor, but she wasn't mentoring me in photography. She was mentoring me in how to navigate the people aspect of it, how to navigate communicating with people and marketing yourself and, pitching yourself and working with people. And I think my natural inclination towards being curious and wanting to know more about people makes me more open to speaking to people after I got over the hump of how do I approach somebody. Just because I think just a natural human condition is you ask somebody a question and you like really sincerely ask them that question and they want to talk about themselves. They want to tell you all about
just talking about this yesterday. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great way to, if you want to know how to make someone like you instantly, ask them about themselves.
Yeah, kind of. And when you have that natural curiosity, they can tell that your interest is genuine and it's not just one of those, I'm letting you talk because I'm going to pitch something to you and then I'm going to be a used car salesman. I think that also makes it interesting. And as we pointed out earlier about the seeing yourself in somebody, I think a lot of my relatability is that I can always find a component in somebody that I'm talking to that I can relate to.
Right.
Or I can find a way to relate to it. And when you have that kind of connection with someone, when you immediately start finding ways to relate, that already forms like a trust bond. That probably sounds like so much fancier than it is because it happens all instantaneously.
Right.
But that I think is a lot of what the people who see me interact with others pick up on. Because as I put in my biography, because I've always found this to be kind of a important facet, is that my grandmother, like her biggest compliment to me constantly is that I can find a way to talk to anybody or to relate to anybody. And I think she sees that from the outside perspective because I'm always trying to find the place that we relate to whenever I talk to somebody new.
Right.
And yeah, maybe that is like a form of natural curiosity. I'm like, I found a way that I relate to you. Now tell me more about you.
Right. Well, I mean, like, that's even why I started this podcast, because I just have that natural curiosity. I just like people. I like knowing about, what they do and what makes them tick. And I like surrounding myself with people who are better than me, like more talented or more skilled or know more than I do,
I do the same.
Yeah.
And I was like, so I saw that in you immediately. Like I could feel the same exact things. Like you find that relatable point and then you're like, tell me everything.
Yes.
Because the way that you see life could impact the way that I see life as well.
My impetus for wanting to get into photography more and videography was, just in those few conversations, like, when you would be doing shoots for us and I would be like, how do you do this? Or, taking a few photo classes with you. It just got me interested. And I bet you didn't know that.
No, and also
and
you were
know.
like one of my first students as well. So if anything, I used you a lot to practice on how to educate people.
Awesome.
Just to be like, how do I explain this? So much of what I've done is kind of self-taught. I mean, of course, I have so many photography books on like posing and theory and all that stuff. But in terms of someone sitting me down and being like, this is how you do it, I never had anybody to do that for me.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of what I learned really was personal experimentation. Like I would come to the same conclusion that any professional would come to, especially in things like lighting, because there's certain lighting theory that just doesn't change because some lighting is flattering for people and someone's not flattering for people.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of the basic fundamental rules. But instead of having someone sit me down and be like, this is how you do the lights, I figured that out on my own.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time I started doing photography professionally and like actively rolling out shoots every single day, I stopped thinking about what I was doing because
Mhm.
I'm just like, this is habit now. I just know that I
Right.
put this here and click these buttons and set the settings like this. And I know a lot of people do math when they do exposure and whatnot. And I just don't even think about the numbers. I just kind of feel the way it's supposed to be. So starting to get into education is what actually got me to slow down and learn more about what I'm doing because all of a
Right.
sudden I have to explain how I'm doing something. And you
Yeah.
can't explain it by saying, I feel my way through it.
Yeah,
That's not an
because
explanation.
that's more of like that's a natural
Yeah.
ability. That's having a good eye and
Yeah.
a good feel, but how do you explain that to someone that is, if you don't also have
Yeah.
that natural ability,
A hundred
you know?
percent. And for me, it was like I learned more about my craft deciding that I want to teach other people how to do this because that forced me to sit down and learn the technical aspects about what I'm doing and turn that theory into this is a factual statement of how this is done. And I'm very lucky to be friends with so many like incredible technical engineers and inventors and all that, especially in Sigma. So it was many of their technical engineers and the technical reps that they sent with me on all the workshops because this generally the way that the Sigma workshops work is that of course I'm teaching you on the photography side of things, but if you have a technical question about how a lens is made or how something functions, we have a tech rep there to help you. And it was me kind of sitting down with like my tech rep friends and being like, "Can you explain to me how all of these things work on an engineering level,
Right.
not just on a, well, I understand the exposure triangle because I'm seeing the direct results of it in my photos. But in
Mhm.
actuality, how does all of this work? And even though my belief is when someone is starting photography, they don't need that level of like detail and technical knowledge of, well, you see, ISO works like this and your sensor works like that, but it still helps me kind of lead someone into explaining things correctly.
Mhm.
And then later on, kind of foster that little bit of curiosity in them as well to go and learn more about how this works.
Right. Well, let me ask you a question. I mean, like, do you think that with schooling, especially, that anybody can be a good photographer or at least get to a point where their stuff is at least,
Yeah.
passable?
So maybe the world will hate me for this answer, but I think that any skill, and where there's a difference between a talent and an eye, like a natural innate ability and a skill. I think anyone in the world can develop any skill.
Mhm.
For example, I feel like I don't have that innate feeling for music if I were to play a musical instrument. But equally, I can say that you could technically put a guitar in anyone's hand and teach them the technical component of it to
Right.
get them to be able to do it proficiently on a technical level. As to whether you feel something from it or you feel like they're creative or you can actually like feel that passion and drive, that's an entirely different story.
Right.
So I feel like anyone in this world can learn how to do photography on a technical proficient level, just like they can learn to do anything on a technical proficient level if they put the time and the effort into learning
Right.
it. In terms of whether other people feel the result the same way, I think that's where the thing gets a little bit more controversial
Right.
because I feel like you either have a passion for something and then people can feel it in your work or you don't.
Mhm.
And a passion and that kind of an eye is something you can't teach. But so that's kind of where I
That's
sit with that.
interesting. No, for sure. No, I guess it's I kind of ask everybody
Yeah.
who comes here, no matter what the
Yeah.
field that they're in, that same question. Like, can anybody do this if they put the work in? And the answer is always a little bit different. So it was interesting to hear your answer. Let's say, for example, that I'm just starting off with photography. What is a good camera to get, and maybe 2 or 3 lenses that I should start off with?
This is always such a difficult question
Well,
because it's,
should I
yeah.
narrow it down to like, oh, I want to do portraiture?
I was gonna say narrow it by subject, and the reason it's actually it's like narrow it by subject, but also narrow it by aesthetic, but also narrow it by where you're shoot. It's that's the funny thing. It's like the question of what's a good first camera, what's a good first lens seems like it would be such an easy question. Like
It's
it would be
probably
one
not. If
of those
somebody
that's
said
like,
that to me about like
yeah,
guitars, it'd be like, well, where do we start?
start.
You know?
Yeah, that's the problem is that so much of photography is such a personal opinion. Yes, I said opinion. It is a personal opinion. It is a personal way of seeing things. because it's a personal way of shooting. And in terms of lenses anyway, because with cameras are easier to narrow down by your budget and what it is that you're looking to be capable of. For example, if you are shooting sports and you need a camera that has a very high speed frames per second, that's a totally different camera. If you want to shoot concerts and you're doing a lot of low light things, that's a different camera. So, but cameras are a little easier to narrow down kind of by price point.
Right.
Versus the lens is what really creates the final result. Like everything that you see of a photo is almost predominantly run by the lens. And that's where the lens becomes the difficult thing to suggest, because that's usually when I send over like a spreadsheet of questions. People look at me like I'm insane. They're like, how, what? These are very specific questions.
Right,
like,
right.
Because you're going to get a very specific answer. So lenses are capable of doing kind of anything. Like, for example, you've probably seen in photography, there are lenses that are kind of boxed into what they're supposed to be used for.
Right.
Such as the 85 millimeter is boxed into a portrait lens.
Right.
But I use it for action photography. So all lenses can be kind of used for any type of subject, but the way that you want that to be captured and the way you're willing to modify how you work to utilize that lens for that subject is where things get very personal and specific. So it's always kind of difficult for me to answer that question. But if you want it kind of very, very like general scale, there is for lenses anyway, kind of the standard trio, which is going to be like a 14 millimeter to 24 millimeter f2.8. Then there's a 24 to 70 2.8. Then there's a 70 to 200 2.8, all from Sigma. We all have that now. Totally redesigned for mirrorless systems. Sorry, my little plug. But we got that like trio.
Right.
And that trio spans from, you've got your wide angle on the 14 all the way up to your telephoto on the 200 millimeters. So if you have those three lenses, you have like that entire range covered. And with all of them being the same aperture of 2.8, it's pretty easy to swap lenses and keep all of your settings pretty consistent because your aperture is going to be relatively the same amongst all of them.
Right.
Depending on how you set it. And then a 2.8 is a good like middle ground aperture between shooting lower light stuff. It's still not the perfect for extremely low light stuff, but it's a good like lower light versus regular like sunny bright days, as well as the kind of depth of field. It's a fairly shallow depth of field. It's not the most shallow depth of field, but it's a very shallow depth of field. And of course you can always narrow that depth of field to be a little bit deeper. So it's a good kind of middle ground. Those lenses are known as the walk around lenses.
Right.
Like, especially the 24 to 70 is like the most kind of sought after walk around lens, because for example, if you're going on vacation to travel somewhere and you don't know what you're going to be photographing there, the 24 to 70 is that perfect middle ground because you've got the wide angle on the 24, but then you've got a beautiful like zoomed in 70. So it's a great lens for that kind of stuff. So I always say, you know what, that trio is pretty basic and awesome. I have the trio. I think most photographers have the trio. I use lenses in that trio all the time. But then when you start telling me what it is that you do want to shoot, then we get a little bit more specific. Because for example, I am a big like lover of the 35 millimeter
Right.
fixed lens. I use that all the time. I have an f1.2 lens from Sigma. It is beautiful. It gives me the entire range with my depth of field and all that. I love that lens. It lives permanently on one of my cameras. But then I also use the 85 a lot. I use the 50 a lot. I love the Prime 14. I've even played with the new like 15 millimeter fisheye from Sigma. I mean, my lens collection is off the charts.
I was going to
because I
ask
use
you.
I have, how many Pelican cases do I currently have? So before we even started this podcast, I was mentioning how I store everything in Pelican cases. Because
Yeah.
I live in a earthquake prone state. So, you know, if that topples over, it has a higher likelihood of surviving.
Right.
I've got to have like 11 of them currently.
Wow.
With gear, with like cameras and lenses and
That's an expensive collection. Yeah, because
it is.
let's talk about lens prices. I mean,
Yeah.
like they can go anywhere from like I mean cheap, like or I don't know, like on the cheaper end, I've seen them for like what $250, depending on who the manufacturer is and if they're new or
Yeah.
used.
Up to a down payment of a car.
Yes.
Leica.
Yeah. Or like what
Yeah.
is it, like the telephoto lenses?
Some of the massive telephoto lenses, like the telephoto lenses you see at sports games.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say sports games, I mean like Super Bowl.
Super Bowl. Okay.
You know, they have these like massive lenses that are like the length of a person. They're sitting on monopods and stuff. Yeah, that's a pretty penny. That's a pretty penny. But you have to remember that in a lot of the cost of the lens is also within the capabilities of that lens. For example, take like the nifty 50, the most basic lens ever, like the 50 millimeter. People always ask me, like, why does a 50 millimeter that is an f1.2, because Sigma just released an f1.2, going to be more expensive than a 50 of, I don't know, an f4 or something like that? And it's like, well, the 1.2 has more capability to it because your aperture is extremely wide. So you have that entire kind of depth of field to pick from. So a lot of the prices has to do with the capabilities. In my opinion, has always been invest in the high-end glass because one, it's going to last you for a long time. Glass does not lose its value as much as cameras do because cameras come out all the time.
Right, right.
But notice how many people kind of use the same glass because glass will maintain much of its value.
Mm-hmm.
And as well as that, the final result that you see is the glass. It's like the age-old test that they've done of putting a really high-end lens on a lower-end camera and then done the reverse, like a high-end camera with a lower-end lens. What photo do most people gravitate towards? And of course, we can sit here and talk a lot about like, well, it's in the eye of the beholder and it's not as much the gear and da-da-da. But when you're just looking at a photo of the same subject shot the same way, you're going to find a significant difference. And that is why people went towards the higher end lens because they've got lens corrections within them. They're better at color handling. They're sharper. And then you're also paying for the construction because my lenses go through hell with me. When people ask me kind of what do I personally look for in equipment, I'm not just looking for versatility in the gear. I'm looking for something that will be able to travel with me with confidence because whenever I tour, that's probably the most like tumultuous situation in the sense that we're in a different city every night. If something happens to my lens, it's going to be harder for me to get another one within that span of time because you're in a different city all the time. Most people who don't travel like that think, well, if a lens breaks, you can go and rent another one right off the bat. You can go pick one. And I'm like, but what do you do if you're in New York today, Philly tomorrow, and then Nashville the next day?
Right.
Like, what? Who's going to rent to you?
Yeah.
I mean, or are you going to ship it back? Or are you
Yeah.
There's just too many factors there that make it really difficult. So when I'm looking at lenses, specifically when I travel, I'm, again, looking at the lenses that are going to survive whatever I might throw at them. I need something that is durable. I need something that can take a few hits and also handle whatever bizarre scenario they might be in and do it well. So I have a few lenses that are kind of like my predominant touring lenses because I know that they can also easily adapt between I'm shooting the concert to I'm doing green room photos to we're out on the street and we're doing like a band promo shoot in Chicago or something of the sort. So it can jump between all of those things.
What are some lenses that you can recommend that kind of do the work for you in camera, like in terms of effects? Like I know Lens Baby has some cool lenses.
I've used their Omni filters in the past, but also make note that all Lens Baby lenses are manual focus. So they were not autofocus.
Right.
So that is something you would have to do manually. So in regards to training your arm to shoot like movement and stuff like that, some people do find that to be a little bit more difficult than using a autofocus lens. For me, it's kind of like both. I've had a scenario where I was out with a band and for something happened to the autofocus of my lens. It just would not work. Of course, it had to be like near the end of the tour, the most important show ever. Because, end of a tour, all the guests are coming out. There's like guests on stage. And I'm like, great. This is the day that it decided to go kaput.
Yeah.
On the day that everyone cares about. So I was very quickly had to learn how to really quickly do all the manual focusing. I love that I could rely on my autofocus for that because then I could just think about my subject. But in terms of in-camera effects, I'm a very shallow depth of field photographer. You probably saw with all my blurry backgrounds. It's like a sincere kind of obsession of mine. And that's because most of my lenses are like f1.2. Which is the widest aperture you can get in an autofocus lens. I know the Leica has the Noctilux lenses, which are f0.95, but those are not autofocus lenses.
Okay.
And that, believe it or not, I'm going to actually say it. Those are a little too shallow for me.
Oh, okay.
I think everyone who knows how much I love my shallow depth of field lenses are probably laughing on the other side. They're like, too shallow for Anabel? She likes everything to be incredibly shallow. What is she talking about? But I love my f1.2 lenses because they are so soft on that background and they have such a sincere shallow depth of field, or not even sincere. All lenses are sincere. Significant shallow depth of field.
Okay.
That all of that is done in camera.
Okay.
And the reason I bring that up is because a lot of the new like AI features in Lightroom and Photoshop can do the artificial depth of field. I'm sure we
Okay.
used to see that in our phones, like the portrait mode,
Right.
but it's glitchy, especially
Yes.
around hair. Like you can see the cutout.
Right.
You can see that same exact thing in a lot of editing software. And I get to sit there and be like, well, I got it that blurry in camera.
Right.
My hair is natural. He doesn't have
Exactly.
that weird like cutout bar around it or something.
Well, since you
So
brought up the subject of AI, how do you feel about AI when it comes to photography?
my take on it, it's not going anywhere. It is here to stay. It is going to continue improving in what it does. And much like there was that big pushback when film went digital, and then when digital went mirrorless, and everyone goes, no, this is going to be terrible. It's going to ruin the industry. The same thing is happening to AI right now. And
Mhm.
ethics aside on how AI is used, because I'm not going to comment on AI within other genres outside of photography, because yes, I think there's so many unethical aspects of it. But within photography, I personally don't think it will ever replace the photographer. And the reason for this is that photography, to me anyway, is so much more than just the photos you get. It's the experience you have during a photo shoot. So much of how I do my photo shoots and how I do photography and whatnot is that I want the client to have an experience with it. I want them to walk in and like enjoy. They got their hair done, they got their makeup done.
Right.
We get to Chicha, we have a fun time. We're like looking in the back of the camera. We're playing with lights. And like that is the kind of experience that no AI can replace, because AI is not an experience. AI is a result. So I feel like the clients that will eventually rely on AI when AI hits a point where it could mimic photography is that those are the clients that would have found a way to replace the photographer anyway, because
Mhm.
there's always different types of clients. There's the clients that go to a photographer because they have to, but they don't want to. If they can figure out how to do it themselves, they're going to do it themselves. And then there's the clients who go to a photographer because they want the experience of a photo shoot,
Right.
or they don't want to do it themselves. So what AI will do is essentially remove the clients that didn't want the photographer in the first place, in which case I'm not catering to people like that.
Right.
They come to me every once in a while, of course, but I know they're not my long-term clients, and that's not what my expectation of them is. And AI will never get rid of the clients who are coming to me because they want the experience of a photo shoot, or they want me to interact with their dog and like pull out the best out of their pup and stuff like that. So I find AI to be a very useful tool in editing. I use it. Yes, I use it
Right.
in my editing because I find that it speeds up a lot
I
of
was
my
gonna say,
workflow.
yeah.
I do not want to spend a lot of time on the computer, but if there is something that I have to generate, like when I talk about AI, I'm mostly talking about like Adobe AI generative fill and stuff like
That's
that.
great.
So here's a prime example of how I use it. All the animals in my photos are on a leash or on a lead. Even the horses have halters on. And the reason I do this is one, it's not legal to have these animals off lead in most places, especially in Los Angeles, but also for animal safety. I just don't trust that it's okay to take your animal off of a leash if we're by a busy road or something of the sort. And you don't always have the choice of those locations. Sometimes they really are in not the safest places. So to keep everyone safe, you have everybody on lead. Well, once upon a time, you're sitting there with a clone stamp and you're like getting rid of this leash and you're stamping the texture of the fur over this and the background. And you're spending a lot of time getting rid of this when now I have generative fill on a key command, like on one of my function keys, where I just highlight the leash, I click my function key and it gets rid of it. Why in the world would I sit there and manually get rid of that leash when I found a solution that gets rid of it in a second?
Exactly.
Why would I do that?
Right.
And everyone's happy because I'm getting rid of something that I would have to do anyway.
because I'm not going to take an animal off leash for the sake of a photo.
Right.
And it sped up my workflow tremendously. It's the same thing with like, say we're shooting and gosh, the iron's not working and a shirt has wrinkles on it.
Right.
I'm like, you know what? We're not going to stop a photo shoot.
Right. Right.
Wrinkles on it.
Especially when it comes to workflow, it really takes all of those tedious tasks away.
Absolutely. In terms of being used in an unethical fashion, I think that's kind of to each their own. I had a wedding client that I had shot some time ago who booked an outdoor venue, outdoor wedding, and lo and behold, as you can imagine, happens to some outdoor weddings. It was stormy and cloudy, and it was not the kind of day that they wanted. But the reason that they picked this venue is because they have this really beautiful outdoor area. But they were really disappointed in the fact that the sky wasn't blue and clear, and that's kind of like what they envisioned for their wedding day. So I used generative fill to change the sky. Then I used all of my color grading to completely change the way that that photo looks to give them what they were envisioning for that. Is that disingenuous to the way that the day was? Sure, but this makes my client happy and this is what they wanted. At the end of the day, these are their memories to decide how they want that done. The rest of the wedding was indoors. So that none of that changed, but like their newlywed portraits and the stuff that they wanted it a certain way. My opinion is that I'm creating the art also for the person who is commissioning me for it. And if that makes them happy and that's within my capability and my scope to do, I'm happy to do that for them.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. That's why I think it's great.
However, with that said, I do believe that there needs to be some sort of legal boundary to how this can be used because going like beyond the photography scope, there's so many, of course, unethical ways people can utilize this, especially when it reaches a point where it becomes hard to discern fact from fiction. So there definitely has to be some sort of boundary. But I can equally say that I am not educated as a lawyer. I am not trying to be some sort of politician to tell you how to set that boundary. That is like well beyond the scope of what I'm capable of. I just know there has to be some sort of boundary somewhere. But in terms of my direct use of it, I love it. Speeds up my workflow tremendously. My clients are happy. I'm happy. I spend less time on the computer. It's great.
Right. Because I remember asking a question a few years ago to a photographer friend of mine, like, oh, how do you feel about like these Instagram filters? And it was also almost like the same conversation, like we're having right now about AI. There's always going to be something, that you have to kind of navigate your way through.
Yeah. And like some of the musicians that I've talked to, and I think in music, AI is a lot more tumultuous because there is you can use an AI to make a full song. You can mimic someone's voice. And, there's so many more unethical boundaries to push there. But I've equally seen musicians tell me, especially in the production space, of like, AI made my life so much easier.
Oh, gosh.
And so they're equally like, I don't hate it for that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, I use it all the time. ChatGPT, for example, just to help out with like YouTube descriptions or, to make an outline for something. It's fantastic because otherwise, I mean, I can do it, but it's going to take me 2, 3, probably like 500 times longer than ChatGPT just because it spits stuff out in like 10 seconds.
100%.
Not even.
I had ChatGPT analyze my entire website and all that to learn my tone.
Yep.
So that if I need a caption done for a photo, because I'm sorry, by the end of the day, I'm usually like brain farted out.
Yeah.
I will totally have it do that. And he can write in my voice. And I'm like, yeah, there's definitely creepy factors. Yeah. It's like, don't get me wrong. This doesn't make any of this less creepy and unnerving. But again, it's here to stay. No one is suddenly going to wipe AI off the face of this planet. So much like embracing any form of technology, you either let it into your life and find a way to use it in a useful way for you, or you continue to be the naysayer who just gets kind of left in the dust because it's not going anywhere. I mean, again, look at the amount of people who did not move from film to digital photography. There's so many photographers who just kind of like their careers kind of vanished because they didn't embrace the new thing. And again, I'm not even here to argue whether digital is better than film or so, because to me, neither is better nor worse. They're just different.
Right.
But the embrace of technology, like the more you resist against it, and I mean that in the sense that resist against technology that isn't going anywhere.
Right.
A trend like, I'm resisting against Snapchat. And then Snapchat ceases to exist or something
Right.
of the sort. Totally different thing.
Yeah, no,
But
totally.
AI, it's been in development for honestly, probably as long as we've been around. I mean, even if you think about it, you using a computer is a form of AI. The various like standard processes of a computer is already a really primitive form of AI. So one could also argue that we're just pushing against something that has already existed because a computer is that.
Right.
I mean, even the stamp tool in Photoshop, the one that nobody even thinks about. We're like, oh yeah, we're just going to stamp this and take a texture. That's an AI,
Right.
and we've been using it forever.
Are there some words of wisdom that you could impart to people who are getting started off with photography?
Do everything. No, it's like just say yes to everything. And I'm genuinely kind of like pushing that because you'd be so surprised at what you might find an interest in. I mean, there have been so many photographers that have come to my classes to do like pet photography or something of the sort. And I kind of convinced them to try other things. I was like, yeah, I know I just showed you how to photograph like cool dogs in front of a backdrop, but have you ever photographed birds? Have you ever photographed horses? Have you ever photographed bands? And they're always like, no, I only thought about photographing dogs. And I'm like, try the other thing.
Right.
And then I'll hit you up in a couple months and see how you feel. And with some of them, they're like, yeah, I found an even bigger passion. Like I love to photograph real estate, for example, or something of the sort. While others were like, no, I just validated that I like to photograph dogs. And I think both are really important things to figure out. You either validate that what you're doing is exactly what you want to do, or you either find something you love more, or you just add another something that you want to do.
Is there anything that you personally feel like you could improve upon as a photographer?
Absolutely. I think that everyone can improve upon their entire lives essentially because the moment you stop progressing as an artist and stop improving and stop trying to fix things that pop up as mistakes in your work, you stop being an artist. So until your very last breath, you should be kind of like striving to do even better. And with that being said, don't run yourself into oblivion trying to forever because I think there's that fine line between being really proud and happy about what you produce, but equally seeing ways that you do better at it. And I feel like with my work, there are definitely times where, and I think every artist on the planet does the same thing, where you sit a lot with what you're comfortable with. So sometimes I find complacency in my work, and I feel like that's often applied to music as well. Like sometimes you write songs that are more comfortable for you because it's something you know very well,
Right.
rather than I don't think I've ever tried pushing my voice here before, or I don't think I've ever tried this like chord arrangement before.
The minute you stop learning, you stop growing.
Yep.
And I think every day you should do at least one thing in which you're challenging yourself.
I love that. You know what? We should make a calendar and just do like a personal challenges thing like
That would be
I'd
awesome.
be like, what did you do today that was different?
We could be each other's like accountability buddies.
Yes.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
I
So I'm gonna
love
text
that.
you tomorrow. Like, what have you done today to challenge yourself?
I'm gonna have like an alarm set in the morning.
Okay.
Like text Alex, ask her what she's done.
Annabelle, please tell everybody where they can follow you.
The easiest way to find me is to hop on Le Googles and just type in Anabel DFlux. If you just type in DFlux or Anabel DFlux, everything pops up. And by everything, I mean the only social medias that I actually use because certain social media just fly over my head.
Annabelle, thank you so much for coming down here. I'm gonna have to get you on another episode just so we can hang out.
I love that.
You're tough to pin down because you're a busy lady. That's all right. Hey, we want both busy, independent, strong women.
Yes.
So yeah,
We
but-
make our own way.
exactly. We make our own way. On that note, everybody, please like and subscribe to the podcast. Turn on your notification bell so that the next episode that comes up, you'll be the first to hear about it. Thank you so much, and see ya.
Bye.
Bye.